Hey, just want to take a second and just really celebrate all that God is doing here at New Life. And one of the ways that we exist is we exist for the purpose of helping people know Jesus better. It's on the back of the T-shirt that a lot of you are wearing. It is like our mission and what we exist to do. And it's our calling to say, what can we do to help as many people know Jesus better as we possibly can? And so anytime we see that happen, we like to celebrate it. And just as a great example of this was last Sunday. Last Sunday, we had too short of 700 people on our property. Isn't that nuts? Yeah, that's too short of that. I'd rather just say 700, but there were two people that weren't here. So if you weren't here last week and there's two of you, well, you're the reason why I had to say too short of that. But hey, we're pumped. That's really cool. And even just like kind of where we've been trending even. The week before that, we had 100 more people on our property than we had the previous year to date. So it's really cool what God is doing, how God is helping us help people know Jesus better. That is what we exist to do, and we are excited about what He has for us as we continue to move into that. And and one of the ways that He's been helping us this year is that we've done some expository sermons, and so the beginning of the year, we walked through the story of Joseph, and we did it verse by verse, just to kind of a slow telling of that story. You didn't know you could do it over the course of eight or 9 weeks, but we did it. And now here we are in our fall series walking through Peter's letter to some churches, the letter called 1 Peter. And it's been really fun. And one of the things I like about expository preaching, okay, is that it gives you this opportunity to cover all kinds of different topics. So just like give you a picture of like as the last 4 weeks that we've been in 1 Peter, okay? 4 weeks ago, we talked about the value of Old Testament prophecy. Last week, we looked at self-sacrifice. 2 weeks ago, we looked at government. And now we're talking about marriage. The beauty of expository preaching is you really cover a lot of different topics. And so this week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about marriage and relationships. And we're going to do this over the course of 2 weeks. So we've kind of been moving through it at a pace. And then we're like, okay, let's pause just a bit to spend a little bit more time on this subject. And maybe you hear that and you think, I mean, why? Why would you want to stop and talk a little bit about marriage and relationships? Well, one of the reasons is, even if you're here and you are happily married with the love of your life, if you were to be like really, really honest, you would admit that at times it can be difficult. Right? Like that marriage isn't exactly an easy thing, no matter how long you've been doing that. And even if maybe that's not it, the thing with the principles that you can apply to a healthy marriage, you can actually apply a lot of those to several different relationships in your life. So for us to take a few weeks and to say, hey, we're going to look at this in depth, I think it's good for all of us to do that. And what we're going to see in our text this morning, though, is that Peter is addressing a very niche situation. And as he addresses this niche situation, we're going to talk about that. And then after we talk about this niche situation that Peter is addressing here, we'll kind of zoom out and look at the principles maybe more broadly. And so you'll understand what I mean as I read the text. This is 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1. And before I start reading it, just hear me. I'm going to explain it all, okay? I'm going to explain it all because I'm going to read it and I'm going to see like just a rage boiling up in some of you. So just like hear me, let me get through it. I promise, like it's all going to make sense in about 15 minutes. Until then, like just don't hate me until it's over. And then you can hate me. But here we go. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1, he says this. He says, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some of them do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of fine jewelry, or the clothing you wear. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Okay, so let me just say this off the chute. That there is a little bit of a challenge of me doing this text for a very obvious thing, and it's that I am a man. Okay? So I get it. I get it. That is the elephant in the room. Okay? That I'm a dude, and I've got this text. Okay? So, and I also will say that part of the elephant of the room with texts like this is that when you think about people who have abused texts like this in the past, oftentimes they look like me. So I get it. I'm well aware of that. I'm well aware of that. And just maybe to put yourself in an interesting situation. And so one of the things that my Connect group does is we talk about the sermon before I give it. So we do that on Wednesday. And so we're talking about this message. We talked about last Wednesday. And so we did that this last Wednesday. And half of the husbands were not there at the Connect group, but the wives were there. And I had to lead that. So I'm just saying that we've walked into this, okay? And so, it's there. And so if you're here and you're new, I know that I'm going to have to earn your trust. I get that, especially with stuff like this. So I'm aware. Give me some time. I think that this will all make a lot of sense. And if you're here and you know me, hopefully you can trust me as we dive in. But I want to explain this text, okay? And so maybe you think, well, why do we need to talk about this? Well, one reason why it's good to talk about texts like this specifically is because I would bet in your world there are people who don't love Jesus, and I would bet that some of them in their beliefs can be almost militant in how they approach people who love Jesus. And one of the things that people who don't love Jesus do is they'll point to texts like this one without understanding the history, without understanding the contexts of what's around it, and they'll try to make you look foolish. And if you don't know how to explain it, on the surface, it's kind of difficult. So I want to explain it, if for nothing else, that when your militant non-Christian friend attacks you by throwing this verse, you'll be able to kind of explain it away. And the other thing is it's here, and if it's here, then it's important. So first, let's zoom out. Let's look at the history. Okay, so what was it like in the first century when Peter sat down and he wrote this to the churches? Well, it's safe to say that 2,000 years ago, when Peter wrote this, culture was way different than it is today. That the way that women were viewed, way different than it was today. So, the fact that Peter would address wives individually immediately raised their status. Because in Peter's time, you wouldn't really talk directly to a woman, but you would talk to them through their husbands. And so the fact that Peter is going to say, I'm going to use 6 verses to talk directly to women is something that in Peter's day would have been revolutionary and immediately raised their status. The other thing is that this group that Peter is talking to is incredibly niche and really a group of women that are doing something that is very outside of the norm for that day. Because we live in a society now where 2 people can be married and the only thing they share is a bed. 2,000 years ago, husbands and wives shared everything, and oftentimes what they shared was totally dictated by the husband. And Peter is talking to a group of women who have a different faith than their husbands. That just didn't happen 2,000 years ago. And so what Peter is saying to them is he's saying, okay, your faith is different than your husband's. Just because that's the case doesn't mean that you should abandon them or give up on them, but instead, you should be doing everything that you can to help them know Jesus better. Which, if you think of the context of 1 Peter and what we've looked at the last several weeks, Peter has been very heavy on this idea of what I would call lifestyle evangelism. Look at what he says in chapter 2, verse 12. He says this, he says, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of his visitation. So this is fitting in that context where Peter would say, you need to use your life to reach your husband. Even if you look at verse 1, they'll throw it up there. Chapter 3, 1. He says, even if some do not obey the word, so that they may be won by the conduct of their wives. So Peter is talking to a group of people who's saying, okay, don't give up on your husband because he's not serving Jesus. And what we're going to see as we move forward is that God uses our suffering and challenges to bring glory to him. We'll see that as we move on in chapter 3. And as we look back at what Peter's been talking about in the previous verses, he's been talking about this idea that it is better to suffer justly than it is to suffer for being wicked. And so in the home, if you're trying to reach your husband, be gracious to him. Don't do things in your life that's going to make it harder for him to find and follow Jesus. And let's just be honest that in the home, because of all of the interaction that comes, there are a lot of things that you could do living alongside of someone that can make it very difficult for them to want anything to do with what you have. And so that's the context he's talking to. And then maybe you're like, okay, well, what about the whole subject and submission part? Because that's the part where maybe it's like, that feels Puritan, antiquated, what does that mean? And I think it's really important that we understand that, one, submitting to, being in submission to anybody doesn't make you less valuable, doesn't make you less important, and doesn't mean that you have any less dignity or honor. And I'll just use this example in the Christian tradition to prove this. We love Jesus, right? That whole song we sang, it was all about Jesus, our redemption. It was in his we love Jesus. We sing to Jesus. We celebrate Jesus. I don't think that anybody would walk in here and think, you guys don't think Jesus is very cool, right? I think that people would see, oh yeah, we're on that team. Well, if you think of the Christian tradition of the Trinity, Jesus subjects himself to the Father. That he says, I'm going to and no one is going to say, well, Jesus is less important than the Father. It's just more of a matter of roles, not a matter of importance. And so that's what Peter is communicating with that idea. And even with the idea of submission and subject, there isn't this mindless submission where you just kind of blindly obey whatever is told. I think that we think that. But even if you look at the whole context of Scripture, you can think there are examples of women who disobeyed their husbands and God blessed them for it. That I don't have time to tell the whole story, but if you write down 1 Samuel chapter 25, there's a story of Abigail and Nabal. Nabal, his name means fool because he was a fool, but Abigail was kind of a fool too because she married him. But there's a situation where Abigail, in 1 Samuel 25, she disobeys her husband, and God actually blesses her for doing it because of what she did was right and what he did was wicked. You also see the story with Esther, the story of Esther in our Old Testament, where Esther, she confronts her husband about an issue, and God blesses her for confronting her husband. So we see that. We might think mindless submission, but that is not anything what Scripture would communicate. So that kind of gives a little bit of context. Now I would just say this. And it's so important for me to say this as we talk about verses, especially like that one. Because I'm well aware that there are men who use verses like this to try to exercise authority and dominion over their wives. And I just want to say two things to that group of people, just in case maybe one of you is here. First, you're completely missing the point. That nowhere in Scripture does it ever say that a husband is to force his wife to submit. It never says that, and so if you are doing that, you are outside of God's will. And I would say this to you too, if that is you, and I mean this because I love you, but I need you to know this. If you're the kind of guy who uses stuff like that to try to force submission on your wife, you and I are not on the same team. And I need you to know that. I need you to know that what you're doing is wicked, and because of people like you, I had to spend 9 minutes explaining that text. And so just so we're clear, like that's never cool. And we're not. Like, you're on a team that isn't a team that I'm on, and if you think that's okay, don't ever say you go to church here. Because that completely misses it, and it's abusing what Peter is saying. And so all that to say, we're looking at relational evangelism. And so we're looking at this idea of relational evangelism, and the principles here can work, okay? So it works for if you're maybe you're one of those women and your husband doesn't follow Jesus. But it also works if maybe you've got a friend who doesn't know Jesus and you're trying to reach them. Maybe you've got a family member who you're really close to, you've been praying for. Like, the principles in this text are really powerful, and God can use them to help people know Jesus better. And it really doesn't matter who it is can fall anywhere in any type of relationship. And so let's look at these principles. The first one is this, is that you need to live a consistent life. That if you want to be effective in your home or with your friends, with your coworkers, that if that's something that matters to you, it's very important that your life matches your words. I mean, look at what he says here. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of your wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. So here's what you got to realize. Every interaction that you have with a human being is an opportunity to help them know Jesus better. Your life is speaking. Doesn't matter who you are. Your life is speaking. The question you have to ask yourself is, what is it saying? And it's so important that we do everything that we can to make sure that our life matches up with what our words are saying. And this is especially true if you have an unbelieving spouse or you have an unbelieving person in your life. Because they're hearing what you say about God, but they're also looking to see if what you say about God is true of what you're saying. That if you say that God is gracious, but you are harsh. That says something. That if you say that you believe that God can do the impossible, but you are always paralyzed by fear and you always expect the worst, that says something. That if you say that Jesus Christ has saved me and given me a new heart, but your life doesn't look any different than it used to, that's saying something. But what I would bet is that as you walk with Jesus, your life does start to match your words. And if you have people in your life who are close to you, and they see the transformation of your heart, I would bet that as they see it, there is a part of them that when they watch the change inside of you, that they're a little confused. That they don't understand like what is happening, especially when behaviors start changing and even like priorities come, like they just shift. And it's so important as people notice that and you have the opportunity to respond, that you do so in a way that is gracious, not condescending. Because here's the thing, of course it doesn't make sense. They've known you one way for a long time. And now you're a different way. And so it only makes sense that they would be confused. And it's so important that when we respond to those things, we respond in a way that's gracious. But it's also really important too that we see that while this is talking about a consistent life, that doesn't mean that we aren't to use words too. That there's this quote that like is somewhere on the internet got credibility, that it's like, witness always, when necessary, use words. They credited to St. Francis of Assisi. There is no way that he said that because that's ridiculous. And because it's like saying, witness always, when necessary, use words. That's like saying, feed the hungry, when necessary, use food. Like your words matter. That I've heard this illustration from one of my favorite preachers. His name's Matt Chandler, and he illustrates it this way because I think it's to say, this is just to draw attention to the importance of your words, okay? Is that today, and this is kind of a miracle, tens of thousands of people are going to eat at Applebee's. Isn't that a miracle, like if you had their food? So like, tens of thousands of people are going to eat at Applebee's. Several of them are not going to order alcohol. They're not. No one is going to go up to that person at Applebee's who doesn't order alcohol and say, "Excuse me, sir, I noticed you didn't get a beer with your meal. Are you redeemed?" Like what? Like, oh yeah, I noticed you didn't order that, so you must be a Christian. Like, no one does that. Like, maybe it's like, I work really hard to keep my landscaping looking good, and it's because it's a reflection of what Jesus has done in my heart. No one's going to come up to you and be like, "Hey, your bushes look really nice. Are you saved?" Like, it doesn't happen. That your words matter. Because if you don't use your words, people are just going to assume that you're being nice. And being nice is great. We should be nice. But we got to let people know why. And it's important to be wise with your words. Like he's talking to women with unbelieving spouses. And I just imagine that some of that is because when someone's heart is hard to the gospel, eventually you just got to stop bringing it up. Because their heart's hard and you're just doing more damage than good as you continue to talk about it. But that's after they already know where you stand. So you live a consistent life if you want to be effective in helping people know Jesus better. And then the second thing that you see from this text is that you need to develop inner beauty and strength. To develop inner beauty and strength. And the question you have to ask yourself as it pertains to your mission to help people know Jesus better. So what do I care more about? Do I care more about how people see me and what I look like? Or do I care more about how God sees my heart? And that's the heart of what Peter's talking about here in verses 3 and 4. He says, don't let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. Now these two verses always make me laugh, because I got saved when I was 15 years old, okay? I was 15 years old, I put my faith in Jesus, and like one of the first things, we went on a trip to Nebraska, and right after I became a Christian, and my grandpa has been serving the Lord for a long time. He's still serving the Lord, and I love my grandpa, and I told him, like, yeah, I'm getting serious about my relationship with God, like, I love God, I'm going to church, like, doing this whole thing, and he goes and gets his Bible, and I'm thinking, like, he's going to encourage me, okay, like, this new believer, it's my grandson, the legacy's coming. He gets his Bible, and he reads that verse to me, and he's like, so what do you do with that? Okay, keep in mind, my grandpa is a Christian, okay? I'm newly saved. I have no idea what to do with that. And to make matters even more confusing, my grandma wears gold jewelry, so I don't know what he's trying to do. And I was like, I don't know, Grandpa. I love my grandpa, great guy. Obviously what he's talking about, he's not saying you shouldn't do those things. He's saying those aren't the things that should make you beautiful. That when you think about your value as a person, when you think about your value or what makes you beautiful, it should have little to do with what is external and much more to do with what is internal. And if you want to be one of those people who helps people know Jesus better, if there's someone in your life who you're praying for, who you want to find and follow Jesus, they are going to be compelled to know him because of your inner beauty, not because of your outer beauty. And I know that no one's thinking like, well, I spent hours in the gym for event. Like, I know that like my muscles, like surely someone will ask me about Jesus because of my muscles. Like, I know that no one thinks that, but though like no one thinks that and no one's going to probably say that, it's more of a question of value. Are you putting the same time into developing your soul that you're putting into developing external things? That if you're really quick to, not miss a day at the gym, or, to study all the fad diets in the world, or all those things, but you wouldn't know what a devotion time was if it hit you in the face. Like that says something. That says something about your priorities. And if you want to be effective, your priorities got to start internally, not externally. And that's not to say that you shouldn't care about your body. Like, I'm a runner. Like, it's super important to me that I get my runs in, and if I don't, I actually feel like stressed about it. Like, I care about that part of my body. God gave you your body. You should absolutely take care of it. But if that's what you think makes you valuable, if that's what you are constantly thinking about, obsessing over, then Peter would say, you know what, you're wasting your time. That you're missing the point. Because at the end of the day, this body that we have, if we're lucky, we get 85 years with it. Maybe you're like, well, my goal is to make it to 100. Okay, then you're going to get 100. Most of us are going to get 85 because we drink way too much soda. It's okay. That's how it goes. You get 85 years. Then it's gone. But these internal things, this internal beauty, this internal endowment, that it's still going to be around in 20,000 years. And so what Peter wants you to see is you get to pick what you want to develop. You can keep investing, trying to fight this aging thing that's happening to all of us. Or you can invest in something far more valuable, which is your heart, which is your soul. You can take time to do that And if you do, people will notice, they will see you, and they will want the things that you have. And then the last thing we see from this text is we see that if we're going to help people know Jesus better, if we're going to be effective in reaching people, that we need to follow the example of Sarah. That we follow the example of Sarah. And let me read it to you, and then we'll keep going. So it says, "For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening." Okay, so I love that he mentions Sarah. Because Sarah, she was anything but a pushover. She was anything but someone who's just blindly following her husband. There's actually a story in the Old Testament where Sarah wrongly forces Abraham's hand to do something, and Abraham does what she wanted. It's the story of Hagar, if you want to check it out. So she was anything but a pushover. But at the end of the day, if you look at her life, she left her home to go with Abraham to the promised land. So you can certainly say that she would have honored her husband in that way. But that part there where it says that she called him Lord. Okay, so I'm not super familiar with the story of Abraham and Sarah. Like I know what happens, but I haven't like really studied it. And so you just kind of you see that, and you assume that throughout her life, she just always called him Lord. Like that's how it reads, right? Like you think, okay, well she addressed him as Lord. Well, if you look at the Old Testament, there is one time that she called him Lord, which is very interesting, because if you look at it, it kind of reads like, but there's one time, and it happened after Abraham and an angel of God were having a conversation about how Sarah, at the age of 90, was going to get pregnant, and that child would be the first in the line of the people of Israel. And this is how Sarah responded to overhearing that conversation. And this is the only time that she calls Abraham Lord. And she does in Genesis 18, verse 13. She says this, so Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have this pleasure?" Why did she laugh? She laughed because she didn't think that God was going to fulfill his promise. She laughed because she thought there is no way at age 90 I am going to give birth to a child. What's the promise of this text, 1 Peter chapter 3? It's that God is going to use you to bring people you love who are far away from Jesus close to him. And I would bet that as you think about those people in your life who you want to experience the grace and love of Christ, that when you think about them, your response is very similar to Sarah's response when God said she was going to get pregnant. You laugh and you think there is no way that that's ever going to happen. They're too far gone. And what Peter would want you to see, and that's why he picked that phrase, he'd want you to see that what is true for Sarah is also true for you. That Sarah did get pregnant, that she did have a baby, that he was all the things that they said it was going to be, and the same is true for you and that person who you want to see know Jesus better. It's on you to live a consistent life, that it's on you to develop inner beauty, but if you do, you can trust God's promise to be true, no matter how far they might seem or how impossible it might seem. And As I close this morning, I want to give you two stories from our setting, from New Life Church. Okay, so this isn't like something I found on the internet about somebody who I've never met. These are people who I know. And these are two situations of people who at one time or another seemed like there was no way in the world that they would ever know Jesus. But because of consistent lives, those who were lost have now been found. First story I want to tell you is of Caitlin and Noel. Caitlin and Noel, they're good friends of ours. They attend our small group. And for 3 years, Caitlin came to New Life without her husband. For 3 whole years. She talked about the season. She said that it was a really difficult season for her because it felt like they were going in two completely different directions. She kept going. That when the opportunities would come, that she would invite him and he would turn it down. But then at some point, Noel said as he saw the joy in Caitlin's life, and as he saw the joy in the life of their daughter, that he realized that what they had was something that he needed. And so 2 years ago, on Christmas Eve, in a moment that I'll never forget, Noel and I were talking. He'd been coming to church now for probably several months this time. In a moment I'll never forget, we had this coup where on Christmas Eve, we're like, he's like, I'm going to get baptized, and I don't want Caitlin to know about it. So he's the only guy who shows up to the baptism service wearing like athletic shorts, but whatever, so he did. And then when the person got up and they gave their little spiel, Noel pops up, Caitlin just starts bawling, and Noel walks over there and we baptize him. And here's what I would bet. In that moment where he was baptized, those 3 years of coming without him and living in front of him was worth it. But it takes a consistent life. Maybe you're like, well, it's not my husband, it's not my wife, it's not my spouse, so I can see where that would be effective, but my situation might be no different. This is a story about a parent talking about a student who is in our youth ministry. And these are her words. She says, "For years I watched as she attended church and went from attending student ministries to attending main church and youth and wanting to help in the church. And she always felt at ease and loved to share the gospel. During several family tragedies, she turned to her faith to help her through those moments. She prayed and asked others to pray with her, and it always seemed to bring her peace. I always encouraged her to go and to serve and to share her faith. And one day, she asked me why I didn't routinely attend church. And I told her that I questioned my faith. And I found that during the times I thought I needed Jesus the most, I didn't feel like he was there. Shortly after this, she purchased me a Bible, and she labeled it with what I needed to read when I was sad. And she said to me, why don't you try again? Just start here. And so I slowly picked up my Bible and I started reading it. And then I began attending church. And I saw the joy in person. She would ask if I felt different on the days I attended, and my answer was yes, I did. I began attending more regularly, and the next thing I know, I'm volunteering and I've joined a small group. But simply put, the peace and joy she portrayed after attending service and serving others, and her simple way of saying, are you going to service, is the reason why I am where I am. Your life is speaking. God's promises to you are true. Those who seem like they couldn't be any further away, God's promise of this text is that they're not too far away from him. And he's put you in their lives for a reason. And I'm just going to pray that God will use you.
Thank you for watching our services. If you have questions or you would like more information, you can visit us online at nlspringfield.com. We'd also love to have you join us at one of our Sunday morning services. We have programs at 9:30 and 11 for adults, students, and kids. We hope to see you there.